Hey everyone, my name's Ellie, and today we are going to be taking a jump start into my latest costume, Water Blue New World Hanamaru from Love Live Sunshine. This is part one of our build log series, so you are in the right spot to start out. Today we are going to be focusing on the white tutu. So if you guys are ready, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so a few things we need to talk about before we start sewing. Tutus are a beast. People don't say that they are sewing a tutu, they say that they are building a tutu because it's more of an engineering project than it is a sewing project. That's just something to be aware of if you're going to be building a tutu for yourself, especially a pancake tutu. You know, the ones that stick straight out from the hips on ballerinas? That's a pancake tutu, and that takes a lot of engineering. It's not just gathering and attaching to a waistband. It's a lot of hard work. Second of all, I am no tutu professional. A lot of tutu makers are trained for years and years and go through apprenticeships and all sorts of things to make these beautiful dancing artwork pieces. It's not easy, like I've said. It's very hard and it takes some training. So the tips and tricks that I am giving throughout this video are newbie tutu sewer tricks. These might not be the right way to do things, but this is how I found to make this tutu work. Now, with those prefaces out of the way, let's get started by taking a look at our materials. So first things first, you are going to be needing a bunch of material for this costume. This includes power netting, which is a stiffer net than maybe a spandex would be, but it has some stretch to give leeway to the body's movement. You're also going to need a bunch of tulle. This isn't just regular tulle that you can find at Joann's. This is tutu netting, and I bought this specifically from a website called tutu.com, which has all sorts of wonderful materials meant for tutu making. You're also going to be needing elastic, hooks and bars, and a few other bits and bobs along the way. Now, this is the point in the video where I would normally show you how I draped this on my dress form. But this time I did no draping whatsoever. This is word from word, pattern from pattern, from a commercial pattern from a website called Tutus That Dance. This is another tutu specific website, which is going to be your best resource if you're building a tutu. But this is a tutu specific website that sells fabrics as well as patterns. This is a pattern for their Bell style tutu. Now, I made my tutu almost exactly according to the Tutus That Dance pattern. The pattern comes with the panty, the basque, which is kind of like the waistband of a tutu. It's the part that goes from the low hip to the high hip. And then it also came with a cutting guide for all the tulle. They don't include a pattern because the tulle is just lots of long squares, but they do tell you how many you need to cut and at what varying lengths based on the type of tutu you're constructing. I'm starting by cutting out all of my tulle. Now, I did have to size up this pattern a little bit since I'm not the typical dancer size. So what I'm cutting doesn't match up exactly with the pattern. It's about 0.15 longer and bigger than the pattern would go. So we are going to be cutting out all of this tulle. There are, like I said, 10 layers, and it is all just long strips. The way you cut tutu tulle is rather than cutting it along the length of your material, you're cutting it along the width. So they say that maybe for your bottom layer, you need 4 widths at 3 inches. So you cut 4 strips across the width of the tulle at 4 inches each. That was a little confusing the first time I read it. I had no clue what was going on. But that's what they mean when they say lengths. It's lengths across the tulle, not the full length of the tulle. This took a long time. Cutting the tulle took an entire day. I'm not even kidding. It took forever. And if you do not have a cutting mat and a rotary wheel, I highly suggest you get one. I purchased mine off of Amazon just for this project, and it was an absolute lifesaver. I don't know what I would have done without one. And make sure that all of your edges are perfectly straight, and that's what you need when you're making a tutu. After cutting the tulle, we moved on and we cut out the material for the panty. Like I said, this is power netting, which is a very stiff 4-way stretch material. I bought some power netting from tutu.com, which is incredibly stiff, and I also bought some off of Etsy because I didn't have enough from tutu.com. Oops. which was a bit softer. So you can find whichever kind you like based on what you want your tutu to feel like. What I ended up doing was using the softer power net for the inside of my panty and the stiffer for the outside. All right, so after we cut out all of these pieces, it's time to start stitching them together. You're going to start by attaching the front center pieces together and ironing those out. And then we are going to line up our two panty layers and baste them together around the edges. And then we are going to go ahead and attach the basque. We are lining up the basque with the top of the panty, and we are going to be sandwiching that seam in between the two layers of the basque. So one goes on the outside panty and then the other layer of basque on the other side. This way all of our seams are nicely enclosed. Now this is something that I am doing from a costuming and a competition standpoint. An actual tutu, the seams would be on the outside, so that way it's easily adjustable for different dancers and it doesn't scratch at you while you're dancing. So just things to be aware of. Like I said, I take a little bit different of an approach than if I were making a tutu for a ballet. Once I had the basque in place and ironed that out, it was time to attach the bias binding that goes around the leg holes. Now this is here to put elastic into. I simply cut out strips of my power netting. I didn't even have to cut this on the bias since the power netting has enough stretch that it's not going to pucker. And then I stitched this along the leg holes just like you would any other bias. First stitching on one side, flipping it over, and then stitching in the ditch for the next side. Now here's where things get a little bit crazy. For my Water Blue New World tutu, I decided to follow the live variation of this costume, which has some blue underbits in the tutu, which you can see as they're dancing, but otherwise you can't tell are there. But as such, I didn't want to have a completely white panty and then have dark blue bottom layers. I thought that would look pretty weird. So I broke out the boiling pot and I got some poly dye and we dyed the panty. I had to test this a few times to find a color that I really liked. But in the end, I just had my water on a rapid boil, added some dish soap and some salt as a stabilizer. It helps it cling to the fibers. And then I added my eye poly dye. So I went ahead and dyed my panty. I wanted the bottom of my panty to be extraordinarily dark and then the top to be white. So I went through and dyed this. This is something that is different for everyone. It's different based on how much dye you use and how big your pot is, etc., etc. But this is just an extra detail that I wanted to make my tutu look professional. Once my dyeing was completed, I went ahead and let my panty dry. I did help it along a little bit with an iron. I don't always suggest doing that, but I was in a bit of a rush, so I did. Once my dye was set, I realized that the basque of my panty did not look very good anymore. So I removed that and added a brand new one made out of the same power net, just 2 layers again. Exact same process, just looks a little bit cleaner now. Now that our panty is ready, we get to add the guidelines. This is the main reason that I bought this pattern. Tutus are not sewn with tools straight across. They are sewn at waves and angles that go along the body to help the tutu stand out and look really, really nice. So what I did is laid out some colored wax paper and then placed my tutu panty on top of that and used a rotary wheel to add those dashed lines. Once those lines were added, I went through and top stitched with a basting stitch along each of the lines, alternating thread color. This is a tip that I found on a tutu blog and it's extraordinarily helpful. This way you know which line you're actually trying to sew on, because as you get closer to the top, these lines get closer together. And if you aren't paying really close attention, you might end up on the wrong line and then your whole tutu is skewed and that would be absolutely terrible. So alternating colored threads really helps with keeping things in line. And now it is time for the hard part, or the time-consuming part, the scary part, potentially, adding all of this tulle. So this is a process. Do not think that this is going to be a day project. Each layer of this tutu took me at least an hour and a half, closer to 2 hours when I was first starting out. That's insane. That's a lot of time. But it looks really good. In the end, it's worth it. But don't go into this thinking you'll get it done in an afternoon, because it's not gonna happen. The first thing that we need to do is sew together all of our lengths of tulle. You can do this with just a basic straight stitch, making sure to back stitch on both ends and just stitch them all together. Once those are all together, it's time to dag the hem. Now, dagging the hem of a tutu gives it a bit of character and makes it not look like just a flat pancake at the bottom. It gives it dimension. So you can either dag with a feathered look, or you can dag with scallops, you can dag with strips. You could really do it however you would like. The two traditional ones, however, are feathered edges and scallops. Now, in the live variant, they did go with the feathered edge, but I personally like the scallops more. I think that they look really cute and clean, especially when they're all put in a row. When you see the gradient on the bottom of the tutu, it's gorgeous. So instead of using the feathered edge, I went ahead with a scalloped edge. So once your lengths are connected for each individual layer, what I did is I took a piece of cardboard and I wrapped my tutu around the cardboard. Trying to keep everything as level as possible, you want to make sure that your edges are all nicely together. So that way, once everything's been wrapped up, you can take the cardboard out and then you can trace on your dag pattern and cut all the layers at once. This did cause a few miscuts. There are a few parts of my tutu where the layers didn't get cut perfectly and I had to go in by hand afterwards. But overall, this was a pretty good method to getting my scallops done quickly and efficiently. So I did this for all 10 of my layers. And once all the layers were put together and dagged, it was time to attach them. Now here's another interesting thing about a tutu that you don't really think about until you're making one. Half of your layers are sewn with the seam allowance going downwards. So if this is your butt, this is your butt. The bottom half of the layers, the seam allowance goes downwards. Since the tutu netting is so stiff, this makes the layers want to point upwards. This gives your tutu a lot of lift. And then the other half are sewn downwards like you would normally sew a skirt. And this way they kind of just flow over and they make this nice little curve over all the layers that are pointing up. So it's important that you sew your upwards layers first, starting in the middle. So you sew this middle layer first and then you go downwards and then you start from the top at the middle and go upwards. Now this is something that in the pattern instructions, they tell you what order to sew the layers on, which was a lifesaver. Otherwise, I don't think I would have known what order to sew these layers on. But like I said, you start in the middle, work your way downward, and then upwards, attaching all of these layers. Of course, you also have to gather them. They are gathered with just a very long basting stitch, which I did separate into lots of different portions in case it broke, I wouldn't be screwed. So we gathered that all by hand and attached it to our panty. Now, like I said, this took a very long time, but in the end, it looks really cool.
Here's another tip that I learned from various tutu blogs. On your panty, you will also have guidelines that go vertically along the panty about every 1/8 around the whole entire thing. You're also going to want to mark every 1/8 of your tulle with a quick basting stitch, so that way you can line these up with the guidelines on your panty and you don't have to worry about having too much tulle in one section. All the tulle will be evenly spread around the panty. That's just a good little trick to remember.
It looks incredibly floofy. I was terrified, you guys. As I was making this tutu, I was adding layers, and each time I would try it on, I'd be like, oh my gosh, I've created a monster, because it was fluffing out like crazy. But once you get all of your layers on, you can go over your tutu. Once you get all of your layers on, you can go over each layer of your tulle with an iron on low heat or a steamer, and this will help press all the layers into place. And rather than being unruly gathered, they will look more pleated almost. They'll be very stiff and in place, which this is how you kind of tame the tutu. That was a life-changing experience when I did that. It took this fluffy monster into this beautiful tutu in no time flat. So definitely iron or steam your tutu. It will incredibly enhance the look of it. So now that we have all of our layers on, it's time to close up the tutu. This is kind of the scary part because you've just spent all your time on this beautiful tutu, and now we have to mess it up for a little bit before we can fix it. So the first thing we need to do is start stitching up that back line of our panty. Now obviously we stitched a bunch of tutu onto there, so you can't just stitch it straight up, otherwise you'll catch all your layers and it won't look very nice. What you need to do is make sure you didn't sew your layers past your seam allowance, and if you did, you're gonna need to seam rip those so you can sew together the back half of your panty. I sewed mine up to the bottom of my basque and then left it open at the top of the basque. Once that is sewn together, you can go through and sew together these layers of tulle. Again, you're just gonna sew them together with a straight stitch, and then we top stitch them back into place just like we did when we were originally attaching them. This gives you a very continuous and never-ending look to your tutu. So once you get the bottom half done, it's time to move on to the basque. This part got a little confusing, and I don't think I did it the way a professional tutu maker would. So for these top layers, we need to leave part of the layer open, otherwise you won't be able to get the tutu on. I started with the bottom layer of my basque and attached that tutu together about a couple inches. I left, I think, 5 inches open at the top. The next layer, I did the same thing, but added 2 extra inches, or however many inches of difference there is between those layers of tulle. This way, once all the layers are finished, it'll be open about the same amount along that hip line, if that makes sense. Once that was finished, I added a facing to my basque. This way I would have a really clean line there for my hooks and bars to go on to. Now it's time to add a waistband. I know, right? There's actually a waistband on a tutu, like what? Yes, there's a waistband. This is just a basic 1-inch waistband made out of satin that we have gone ahead and folded into like a bias type thing. We are stitching the first half on, then we're putting elastic in there, and then we're going to stitch in the ditch for the second half. The reason you put elastic in this waistband is because it'll help it fit to the dancer no matter how they're moving or anything like that. So this elastic sits right around your waist. Now we can go ahead and add our finishing touches to the top of our tutu. This would be the hooks and bars that close it in the back. You don't want to use a zipper for a tutu because you want it to be adjustable for other dancers or even for yourself if you fluctuate in body shape. So we are going to be using just regular dress hook and bars. You're going to put the hook on one side, the bar on the other, and I put these in between my layers of tulle on the tutu. At this point, we can go ahead and add our elastic to our leg holes. This is again to help the tutu fit the dancer really, really well, and you don't have to worry about any sort of slippage or not so sightly things as you're dancing because the elastic's holding it all in place. It's awesome, really, really cool. So I fed this 1/4 inch elastic through my bias bindings on my leg holes, and then I stitched together the crotch with a simple straight stitch. Really easy to finish off the bottom of this tutu. Now, for my tutu for Water Blue New World, I ended up adding a plate to it, which is a decorative top layer. Mine is just a very simple apron plate, but we're gonna talk about that a bit later since it has a few extra things on it. The last thing that I wanna talk about in regards to the tutu itself is these elastic tabs that go along the waistline. These are really, really cool, and I'm so glad that I found this when I was reading about tutus. What it is an elastic tab with a buttonhole on one side of it. The other side is stitched into the waistband of your tutu. And then there is a button on the inside of your bodice that this elastic goes onto. I put 5 of these on my costume. 1 center front, one on each front side, and then one on each front back. What this does is it keeps you from getting any sort of gap between your skirt and your bodice as your dancer is moving around. So let's say that you put your arm up in the sky. This obviously shifts the way your bodice fits. Your waist of your bodice, if it's structured, is no longer going to be at your waist. It's going to have moved up a bit. And your tutu, since that is held on along your crotchal region, is not going to shift up the same way as your bodice. But if you put these elastic hooks there, then your tutu moves with your bodice. It's like it's one piece without actually being one piece. So, really cool little trick that I adore and I plan to use a lot in the future because I think it's going to be really useful. So really cool little trick. All right, now last things last, make sure you finish up any sort of scallop hem or dagged hem on your tutu to make sure that everything is even and cohesive. And after that, you are ready to dance the night away. I really love the way this tutu came out, you guys. I am like in shock with how good it looks. I did not expect it to look so professional and really, really cool, especially with that gradient. While you can't really see the gradient from the outside, anytime I start moving or if I show it to you from the bottom, it looks really, really, really cool. And I'm glad we took the extra step to dye the panty of the tutu when really we didn't have to. But I, again, think it looks really nice and professional. Now, this tutu would not have been possible without the pattern from Tutu Set Dance. So I'm going to leave a link in the description. Be sure to check them out. And if you plan on making your own tutu, I definitely suggest grabbing one of their patterns. Well then, next time we are going to be focusing on Hanamaru's Water Blue New World bodice. This was a bit of a challenge, but it turned out really, really cool. And I can't wait to show you how I made it. So again, I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to leave a thumbs up. And if you really, really enjoyed it and want to see the next part, make sure that you subscribe and then click the little bell button to be notified of when the next part comes out. I hope that you guys are having a wonderful holiday season. And until next time, be sure to keep sewing, stay positive, and have fun. I will see you all in the next video. Okay,